Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Itipiso bhagavato samma sambuddho dijjhara sampanno sugato lapiru anuttaro visaddhammasarati sattvaira manussanam buddhavati swakato bhagavata namo samyukto vadayo ehipassiko ovanayo pachattam veritano vinyuhiti supatipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho Uddhipalipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho Nyāyapatipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho Samīcitipatipanno bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho Yadidamcācāri purisayukāni ātho visamuddhara esa bhagavato sāvaka saṅgho āhuneyo pāhuneyo dāhineyo anjali karaniyo anuttaram puññam lokasati.
Talked a little bit about the process of developing oneness or stillness in meditation. This morning when we did metta for a disliked person, I noted that with the disliked person we have just that one thing. Just that. Only one thing left to do. Nothing else happening. And to this point in the meditation that the mind starts to approach oneness or unification. And we experience that in the meditation because everything else starts to fall away. The Pali word for unification, ekaggata, there's actually a number of words for it, but ekaggata or ekata or ekodi bhava, sometimes translated as one-pointedness, which I think is a little bit not quite the right impression. So we're not talking about like a point of light, like something very narrow and very sharp and well-defined, but rather it's oneness in the sense of an absence of diversity. When everything else is gone, there's only one. And this idea of oneness is profound, actually. And honestly, when I think of how Buddhist meditation is talked about a lot today, and the way that the different narratives sway back and forth on Buddhist meditation, I often makes me feel kind of sad. I feel like words are demeaned and experiences are demeaned, so that things that are sacred and And I think that in the 20th century, I think Buddha is the most profound shift in Buddhism. It's something that most people don't notice because they've never really seen anything else. But the most profound shift in Buddhism, probably ever in the history of Buddhism, is the shift to a culture relentlessly focused on getting away with as little as possible. How little of the path can I practice in order to get the results that I want? And if we look at the way that people talk about meditation and different traditions, different techniques, we come back to this kind of thing again and again. What's the bare minimum I can do to become a stream enterer? Do I have to do this? Do I have to do jhanas? Do I have to? Mom, do I have to? Do I have to do my homework? Well, I don't know. You want to learn? Probably a good idea to do your homework. Actually, I don't really believe that. I think doing your homework's a waste of time. No one should do it. But anyway, you get the point of what I was saying. So maybe we should stop kind of whining like teenagers about how we can get away with doing as little as possible and start behaving like spiritual aspirants who are inspired by what is possible. Because it seems to me that every time that we make excuses for what little we have to do and how much we can get away with, what we're really doing is diminishing our humanity. We are diminishing our own potential. And we are saying, oh, I can't. We can't. That's too much. I don't believe in myself. I don't believe in the path. I don't believe in the possibility for transcendence. So I'm going to do everything that I can to make my spiritual path remain within the limited confines of my idea of what's possible. Because I don't want to expand my idea of what's possible and to imagine that perhaps what's possible is a lot more than I've ever imagined. When we're thinking about the practice of Samadhi, we're thinking about the culmination of the Buddhist path. Everything else comes together in that one point. And everything at that point in meditation, everything is beautiful. Everything is just incredible. Everything is just amazing. And these are the things, these are the states of consciousness that the sages in India spent so long trying to practice, leaving behind everything, going into the mountains, going into the wilderness, meditating for years, for decades. And still, meditation was fragile, easily, hard won, and easily lost. So in a state such as this, which is transcendent and which is beyond the normal consciousness of the human realm, the meaning of everything changes. Everything changes. And you've already experienced something of that in your retreat so far. You've already experienced that your mind changes, your consciousness changes in all kinds of ways. And so when we're developing meditation, what happens is that things things sort of develop in a kind of wobbly and irrational and inconsistent way. So things are sort of now up and now down, and now back and now forth, and they're in and they're out, and all of those things. But gradually, as we go on, things kind of slow down and meld together. And gradually we feel, oh yeah, mind is coming together. It's an organic process, gradually it comes together. Until at one point it settles in. And we have oneness, we have stillness. Of transcendent theological and metaphysical significance. And before the Buddha came along, the most insightful and profound philosophy in this was the non-dualist philosophy of Yajnavalkya, who called this state of meditation infinite consciousness, a sheer mass of knowing, the unseen seer, the unheard hearer, the unthought thinker, the unknown knower. And he used these kinds of terms to describe what he regarded to be the highest divinity, that which is eternal and everlasting in the world, that which is what from which the world springs and into which the world dissolves. And such is the profundity of these states of consciousness that one who has entered them, even one who has entered them like Yajnavalkya, who was a man of great wisdom and learning and discernment, even one such as he would think, this is God. This is the divinity of the cosmos that I realize. And I think that sometimes when we overly psychologize these states and we treat them as something that we're going to measure with a MRI machine or something, we can't help feeling that we're getting further and further away from what we're talking about. You're not going to see God in an MRI machine, so far as I'm aware. So this isn't about neurons and blood flow and electric activity and all of those kinds of things. It's about a potential for humanity which goes far beyond anything that we normally imagine. Now, when the Buddha came, he also practiced these same states. But when he looked into them, he discerned even further with his insight, and he realized that even these states are conditioned. Even these states are not eternal. And so they're not what he was looking for. But he also understood that they were the path. Literally, this is the path to awakening. And so for the Buddha, these were not a metaphysical reality, not a reality of theology. These were a reality of nature. This was an expression of how the mind works. It's only natural. Now, nature works in all these funny ways, doesn't it? When I started meditation, I did my first couple of retreats, and then I went to Malaysia. I spent some time working on an organic farm there in Penang. And while I was there, I read the book called One Straw Revolution by Masanobu Fukuoka. I don't know if anybody here has read One Straw Revolution. Classic of the one of the books that started kind of modern organic farming and so on. Anyway, two stories from that book always remained with me. One was a story where Fukuoka had inherited some Nashi pear orchards from his father on this farm. And he wanted to practice natural farming. So these pear trees had been trimmed and shaped to make them easy to pick the pears. So you cut off the tops of the trees and you get these wires and you bend the branches down so they grow low, so that they're easy to pick the pears off. And Fukuoka thought, well, and how we are when we come to meditation, that we are so used to our minds being bent out of shape by literally everything, that we come to meditation and we're like those pear trees. So we need to be, later on he learned how to do this, you need to nudge those trees back into shape, little bit by little bit. You can't force them. You have to nudge them. But one of the things that he found is like, he was like, okay, I'm going to try and nudge these trees back into shape, train them back into shape gently, but I don't know what the shape should be. And he traveled around the farms around him, looked at all the different farms, and all of the orchards were cut the same way and trained the same way and trimmed the same way. He couldn't see the natural shape of a pear tree anyway. So he had to learn. He had to learn how to bring about that shape. So this is one story. Another story that he told was when there was a cloud of locusts came and was eating all of his rice. So all the rice had been planted and was growing, and suddenly these clouds of locusts descended and came out one day and saw all these clouds of locusts eating his rice. And he looked at the neighboring farms, and the locusts were eating their rice as well. And all the other farmers were getting out on their tractors with all of their chemicals, and they were going out and they were spraying all their fields and killing all the locusts. And he looked at his own fields and how his rice was being eaten by these pests. Thought, So he went inside, got a jar of honey, came outside and sat down under the tree with a jar of honey and a spoon, and just ate honey while watching the locusts eating his rice. Came out the next day, the locusts are still there. And the third day he came out, the locusts had moved on. They'd gone. And he wondered why. And he looked closely at the rice, and he realized that in the rice plants, there were these little spiders that had come out of nowhere. Millions of them. They'd all spun their webs, and they were catching the locusts and eating them. It's interesting, isn't it? He learned something that day. And of course, all the other farmers had killed all their spiders. They didn't have them anymore. Somehow, nature found its own balance. So I always remember these two stories because these two stories give two complementary lessons for meditation, both of which are true. Sometimes you can't just let your mind go because nature is already out of whack, and we need to train our mind gently and slowly to try to find that state of nature, a state of nature which we have been so alienated from that we don't even know what it is. But when our mind is healthy and it's going well, then we can simply let it go. And even when there are problems and things seem like they're going badly, then the mind has a way of finding its own balance, if only we're a little bit patient. But when we meditate, one of our greatest obstacles is our mistaken idea that we can't do it, that we have to reduce the Dhamma to our level because we're not good enough for the Dhamma. And part of the reason why we think like that is because all we've seen around us is ruined nashi pear trees. And we don't know what the shape of a natural mind is. And we don't know what that possibility is. And we don't know whether we really believe in it. And so because of that, and because of that doubt, we undermine ourselves and we restrict ourselves to that which is broken, to the knowing which is broken. So I think it's all a bit sad, really, because I think the Dhamma is so beautiful and so inspiring that it should not be a question of us cutting ourselves down to fit the Dhamma or to fit what we think, or cutting the Dhamma down. But it should be a question of us growing abundantly and fully and exuberantly to be as vast as the Dhamma allows us to be. That oneness is the absence of another. The Buddha described that kind of mind as mahagata, growing great, vipula, vast, apamana, measureless. He said, when he's talking about metta, he said, develop your mind like the great ocean. Vast as the great ocean. Develop your mind like the sky. Develop your mind like the great earth. The Buddha knew that consciousness was capable of incredible things. And so one of the characteristics of the Buddha's teachings, as the Buddha's teachings are anti-metaphysical. And what I mean by that is that the Buddha did not believe that there's some kind of separate metaphysical reality that intervenes in spiritual practice. So this is what we would believe, for example, if we say that we have seen God, for example. So we meditate and we've seen God, so that means that that separate metaphysical reality has kind of intervened in the meditation. So the Buddha didn't believe in that. How he talked about the mind was empirical and psychological. But it wasn't about reducing the metaphysical and the theological to the psychological and the empirical. It wasn't a reductive teaching. It was the opposite of reductive. It's saying that the thing that you thought was as magnificent as God actually lives inside your own mind. And you have that potential too. And what that means, that empirical nature of meditation means, is that all of the things that we take as significant about meditation are ordinary things. Everything transcendent began as something ordinary. Just normal mind stuff. So all of the things that have been trapping you in distraction and suffering and anxiety, those same things, the same mental qualities, are the same things that can lead you to Samadhi. And those same things we talked about in the Madhupindika Sutta, the perceptions, thoughts, these are also the foundations of meditation. So when the Buddha was talking about Samadhi or oneness, one of the ways he talked about that was in terms of 5 mental factors. And those 5 mental factors are often called the 5 jhana factors. Now, just very briefly, when the Buddha talked about Samadhi in the path, in the Noble Eightfold Path, normally Samadhi is explained in terms of the 4 jhanas or 4 absorptions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the meaning of the word Samadhi and jhana are. I'm going to talk a little bit very briefly about the 4 absorptions. But I'm going to focus mostly on those 5 jhana factors, which are the factors of the first jhana. Now, just briefly on the meanings of words. So Samadhi means, I'll start with jhana. So the word jhana has 2 meanings. So it's a word in Pali which represents 2 different roots from Sanskrit. And one of those roots has the meaning of contemplation. But what I mean is that there's something about like the focus and the concentration aspect there which is similar. But the other aspect of the word jhana is light, radiance. Jhana means illumination. It's literally a word for a lamp. One of the most beautiful suttas in the Pali Canon is the Samannapala Sutta. And in there, King Ajatasattu is seized by anxiety and remorse and is looking for somebody who can bring peace to his mind. And his doctor, Jivaka, recommends that he go to visit the Buddha. It's nighttime, it's a moonlit night. And so he heads out from the palace to see the Buddha in the monastery. And because he's so afraid, he surrounds himself by his royal guard, which are all elephants. And his guards are all women, which apparently was a thing. Like apparently the royal harem doubled as the guards for the kings. So as he's going towards the monastery, and they're approaching, and the king became very scared, terrified. Jivaka, he says to his doctor, you told me that the Buddha was there with all of these monks, but I don't hear a single sound. Is it a trap? And Jivaka says, do not fear, great king, do not fear, great king. See, the lamps are shining in the hall. Go forward, great king, the Buddha is there. A moment of great poignancy, but also of great literary subtlety, because the lamps are shining. The padipa, the lamps, it also means the guides or the teachers, and the shining of the lamps, jayanti. They're practicing meditation and practicing jhanas. So the guides are practicing jhanas in the hall. And if you go into the light, then you will see the Buddha. It's a very subtle passage, very simple, but so beautiful. So these two meanings of the word jhana, I believe the idea of jhana and the idea of the word of it stems originally from the very ancient Vedic hymn 1,000 years before the Buddha, called the Gayatri Mantra. Om Bhurvasva Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dhyo Yona Prachodayat, which is recited by the Vedic priests at dawn for thousands of years. And it means something like homage to the celestial deity whose divine radiance impels my waking consciousness. Something like that. It's a difficult verse to translate. And Savitur Varenyam, that magnificent sun, whose divine radiance impels my mind towards awakening. So on the one hand, well, it's bright outside and you're going to get up. It's actually very simple. But on the other hand, there's something very profound about that. And so the word there, dihi, I believe is one of the roots of jhana, meaning in that kind of sense of like the radiant awakening of consciousness. So an interesting thing is that the word samadhi also has those two meanings. So samadhi, the basic meaning of samadhi is collected or gathered. At least making a start with it. May I be happy? It's a good thought. It's a nice thought. When we're talking about vichara is the reflection on the meaning of that thought, the meaning of the words. And so when we are bringing our sense of meaning and our sense of depth and reflection to those words, then we're practicing that vichara. It gives like a deeper wisdom and understanding and flow and continuity with those words. And from the beginning, we have tried to not just say those words, but to say them as well as possible. To bring all of our care and attention and mindfulness to those words. So we should never think of them as being just words. These are part of the things that lead us to Nibbana. They're part of the path to Nibbana. They're not just words. And as we go on, those words perform a very critical function in the meditation. Namely, that they keep our mind directed and sustained with the meditation. And in fact, it's the directing and the sustaining of the mind which is the key function here, not the words. The words, it turns out, are an incidental detail. They're an application detail. underlying function is the directing of the mind and the holding of the mind with the meditation. That's what vichara really meant. So as we go into the meditation, as we go deeper into the meditation, the words are still there, but the words are almost almost like subterranean, almost like just a reminder underneath there. While mind is being held with that feeling of pleasure and rapture. You know? That's how these things work. We're applying our mind, applying our mind, applying our mind. And the more we do that, the more subtle that comes. Until eventually we can drop the words entirely. Now in Metta meditation, the dropping of those words happens at a very specific stage in the meditation. The words are getting quieter, maybe sparser, maybe gentler, but they're still there. Will it dislike one, and the dislike one be happy. Until we feel a transformation in our mind that comes when we realize what meditation circles we call the nimitta. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that nimitta in just a minute. So we talked about the vitaka vichara. Then the piti is the rapture or excitement, and sukha is the pleasure. The piti is the sound, is the feeling that you have when you hear the sound of the ice cream truck. And the pleasure is the feeling that you have when you're eating the ice cream. So the piti has a sense of uplift, pricking up your ears. It's inspiring. It's skin. Sometimes like a tingling on our spine. Sometimes we'll be shaking. Sometimes you'll feel like your body is just like blowing up, like a balloon. Sometimes you'll feel like you're floating up in the air. Anyone have a feeling like they're floating in the air in meditation? Yeah? Don't open your eyes. Unless you've got a nice soft cushion to land on. Sometimes it can feel the opposite. So sometimes it can feel like your body has become rock. Like so heavy and solid, but not heavy in a bad way. Heavy like immovable. And many other different manifestations. And none of these are particularly important. What matters is what we call paranapiti, which is a rapturous feeling which suffuses through your whole body. And it's developing that paranapiti that we've been doing since the beginning of meditation, when we have been focusing on meditation in our body. And that uplifting feeling, tingly feeling, energetic feeling, all of that, this is the rapture. The sukha is a complement to that, which is the tranquilizing dimension of that pleasure. Settling, stilling. And our whole body is filled with that rapture and bliss. So the Buddha talked about this kind of thing quite a lot, and talked about samadhi in terms of suffusing rapture and bliss through your whole body. Once again, this is another area where I think a lot of modern interpreters with only a limited knowledge of Pali completely misunderstand what is being talked about. The body in meditation is not the body. Just as thoughts are not thoughts, feelings are not feelings. We're talking about transcendent states, and everything has a more subtle meaning. So in Buddhism, we have two bodies. Do you know that? We have two bodies. We have what they call Olarika Kaya, this one. And you have the Sukhama Kaya, is a subtle body. sometimes called a manomaya kind, mind-made body. And subtle body is a very interesting topic, one that is mentioned quite a lot in Buddhism, actually, but almost ignored by modern interpreters of Buddhism because I think it sounds a bit new agey or something. But it's definitely there. And it's interesting to think about what this subtle body really is. So in some senses, what that subtle body is a kind of energy or a field of energy. And that field of energy has, in a sense, certain physical properties. Most obviously, it has a physical property that it mirrors our Olarikakaya, our coarse body. And so the Buddha described it as Sabanga Pachanka. So complete with all of the lesser and minor, all the major and minor limbs, faculties, ahimindriyam. So it's like a copy of your physical body. One way of thinking about that subtle body is that that subtle body is the body of proprioception. It's the body that you perceive that you have from the inside. And when you're sitting in meditation, you perceive a body that has feelings, that has energies, that has movements. And those feelings and energy and movements and position and everything mostly is similar to your Olarikakaya, your coarse body. But of course, it's not exactly the same. And I'm sure we've all heard stories where somebody will have an amputated limb and yet they'll still feel like their leg is still there. And more generally, I think that our physical body and our body of proprioception or subtle body they're not like 100% matched up all the time. And you experience this kind of thing, I think, all the time in your meditation, where you've got like some kind of pain or some kind of energy or some movement or something like that. And like, are those things actually in your body? Or are they not? Are they physical? Or even like the feeling of metta? We can always just say, oh, you feel the metta inside your body. But of course, you're feeling it inside your body of proprioception, your subtle body. Right? Now, is that something that a doctor is going to be able to measure and say this is a real physical thing inside your body? I don't know, maybe, because these two things are interconnected. Right? So the body that we experience in meditation is this subtle body. And that's the body that we are suffusing with metta. We are suffusing with rapture and bliss. And as we do so, that subtle body changes quite dramatically. Because when we begin, it has all of these tensions, all of these emotions, all of these energies and pains. And the longer that we go on, all of those things become tranquilized. Those tensions become resolved. And those pains become beautiful. They become pleasant. And our body, that inner mental body that we have, is full of light and bliss. This is what the Buddha was meaning when he's talking about suffusing your body with rapture and bliss. He's talking about your inner experience of the body, namely the subtle body. And that is suffused with bliss. And this is what in meditation, this is what's called rupa. Like it's your inner perception of your body or physical properties is called rupa. So ultimately, that subtle body completely displaces your perception of the physical body. And as you do so, you lose sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And you become completely immersed inside this subtle body. And now we're approaching what we call unification or oneness of mind. So I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what unification is. Now, unification is something that is not necessarily defined in great detail in the suttas, but I think we can learn quite a lot about it from the way the Buddha talked about meditation, as well as understanding something of the way that others in the Buddhist culture understood it and talked about it, as well as, of course, relying on experience of the meditators through the ages. And I think we can speak of 4 dimensions to oneness of mind. 4? Probably more, but anyway, let's stick with 4 for now. Okay, let me go through them. Ekagata Ramana. Ekagata Ramana, oneness of object. So what that means is that, this is actually an Abhidhamma term, that's why they use the word object. But the basic idea is that sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch are no longer there. Only one thing that you're aware of is your meditation. And you're in the Metta meditation, you're aware of the feeling of Metta. And that's, again, the technical term for that is the nimitta of Metta. And so that transcendent and transformed experience of Metta, which is purified, bright, steady, that is the only thing that we're aware of, nothing else. So as soon as we're aware of that meditation, feeling of Metta in meditation, and we're aware of the sound, guess how many things that is? Yes, that's 2. Right? Guess how many things 1 is? Not 2, I can tell you that. Right? So this is ekagata ramana, oneness of object. Then, actually, you could say ekagata dwara is ekagata dwara. Right? Anyway, moving on. Then there's ekagata chitta, one kind of consciousness. Continually and uninterruptedly aware only of that meditation, not of anything else. It's not moving, it's not thinking, it's not changing, it's not remembering or willing. It's just knowing, pure, uninterrupted knowing. This is ekagata chitta, so ekagata dwara, just change my translation of that. Ekagata dwara, one door, one sense door. Ekagata chitta, oneness of consciousness. Ekagata kirya. So ekagata kirya means that there is unification of function. And what that means is that everything is working together. So you know that thing, right? You know what I'm talking about? That thing where you, poor little you, with all of the crap that you have gone through and all of the suffering that you've endured and all of the nonsense, have managed to get yourself together to actually finally sit meditation after everything. And you come and you sit down to meditate, and what does your mind do? Everything but the meditation. And part of you really wants to meditate. Part of you is thinking about pancakes. And part of you is thinking about work and about the one that you love. Or maybe, do you really? But anyway, and all of that stuff. And your mind is pulling in a million different ways at once. And as we go on in meditation, the mind gradually is coming together. And I think all of you have experienced that, at least to some degree. We experience the mind coming together and that feeling, oh, our mind is harmonious. Yeah. Again, it's just a natural process. So mind comes together and it's completely harmonious. So ekagata means that all of the functions of the mind are completely balanced. Everything's there in the right amount. Everything's working together, not against each other. So that all of those different functions of the mind are forming a oneness. So this is the third dimension unification. Oneness of door, sense door, oneness of consciousness, and oneness of function. And the last one is ekagata kala, oneness of time. This is one of the most mysterious and interesting ones. So we've been here on meditation retreat, right? For, I think it's about 20 minutes since we started the retreat. Is that right? About 25 minutes, something like that. And it's funny that we just literally just started it a minute ago, and then here we are, and we're going to be finishing it soon. I don't know who organized that, but that's just how it is. And then when you meditate, time goes very wonky because the days get much faster and the minutes get much slower. And it's, I mean, 1 minute of your meditation can sometimes last longer than the entire meditation retreat. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, right? But you all know what I mean. Yeah, it's weird. Time is changing. Your inner perception of time is changing. Now, in Buddhism, and I shouldn't talk about this for too much because it's one of my favorite topics. It could take some time. But anyway, so Buddhism, time is not an objective reality of the world. Time is what they call an upadaya panyati, a derived concept. And what that means, I would say that the Buddhist definition of time is that time is a concept which is derived from our memory of the changes in consciousness. So let me repeat that. Time is a concept derived from our memory of changes in consciousness. So when our consciousness is just the same, we don't have any memory of changes in consciousness. So we don't have any time. And that's why in meditation, your perception of time is slipping and changing because your mind is slowing down. The rate of change of your mind is slowing down. And because your perception of time depends on the rate of change of your mind, then your perception of time starts to go wonky. Very interesting that in Buddhism, as far as I'm aware, Buddhist suttas are the first literature anywhere that talks about the relativity of time. I've read most of the world's ancient literature. There's not that much of it that's older than the suttas. And I've never read anywhere that talks about the relativity of time. That is to say that time in different dimensions will move at different speeds. So for example, if you have a friend who's dying, and then you say to them, look, you're going to die, you're going to get reborn in heaven. Come back and say hello to me when you're in heaven and tell me what it's like. And then they get reborn in heaven and they think, well, I'll just it's just like visit the divine gardens and listen to the heavenly music for a while, and then I'll go see my friend this afternoon. And by the time you do that, like 1,000 years have gone by on Earth. Yeah? And so this is that relativity of time. In fact, for those of you who are aficionados of physics, and then in the suttas, you find that they talk about the relativity of time, the relativity of dimensions, and the relativity of mass, which hopefully sounds familiar to a few of you. Those three are the things that are changed when you approach the speed of light. And these are all characteristics of the devas, which are beings of light in the sutta. Yeah. I think that's cool. It's not as cool as the fact that, well, no, I shouldn't mention that. I shouldn't. Okay, I will. So in the suttas, there's a sutta called the Rohitassa Sutta. Rohitasa means red horse. And in this red horse sutta, it says that Rohitasa was the deity that was the fastest of all beings. Faster than anyone else. And so fast that in a single stride he could cover the entire width of the continent of India in the time it took for an arrow to fly across the shadow of a palm tree. And yet, as fast as he was, he decided to travel to the end of the world. And he couldn't reach the end of the universe. So he came back to ask the Buddha how to reach the end of the universe, the end of the world. And the Buddha said, it's in here. Silly. This is where the end of the world is. So some mad genius on our sort of central forum decided to do the math on that one, because we know how wide India is, right? We know how big a palm tree is. We know how fast an arrow flies. Do the math, and then you get the speed that Rohitasa, the red horse, would travel. And this red horse is the fastest being in the world. And we know from Vedic texts that originally it was the name for a sunbeam. So Rohitasa is the sun, the ray of light traveling across the universe. How fast does he travel? According to the suttas, do the math, 300,000 kilometers per second. So, I don't know. So did the Buddha predict the speed of light? Did he know what the speed of light was? I don't know. I honestly, I've been studying suttas for such a long time. I'm rarely gobsmacked by anything. But when I saw that one, I was gobsmacked. I'm like, that's very specific. Like it gives, it's just a simile, right? I mean, if it had been like 1,000 orders of magnitude different, nobody would have thought twice about it. It's just a simile. No one's expecting that. And the guy who did the math wasn't expecting it. He just, it's this wide, okay, that's how fast an arrow flies. That's how big India is, put it in. Try it yourself when you get home. 300,000 kilometers per second. That's how fast Rohitasa is. Anyway, moving along. Dying, coming back to life. And so there's this kind of idea of immortality or eternity, but not like really sort of clearly defined. In the Upanishadic literature, which came later, it's like 100 or 200 years before the Buddha, then the idea of eternity is much more explicitly stated. And the Brahman, the divinity, which according to their philosophy is the infinite consciousness that makes up the universe, is eternal. And one of the Buddha's insights was to say, actually, that is impermanent. And I find like one of the things in Buddhism that it's very easy to then, I think we dismiss ideas of eternity too lightly. The Buddhists will come along and say, oh yes, they said it was eternal, but it's not really eternal, it's impermanent. Okay, fine. But what does it actually mean? Like, why did these people say this was eternal? What were they talking about? Were they just making stuff up? I don't believe so. I think they were talking about their experience. And I think they're talking about a profound experience of transformed consciousness. And in that consciousness, it feels like you are contacting eternity. And the Christian tradition, they call this the eternal now. And so in that state, it's not that you've got like the present here, and I've got to try to stay in the present while the past and the future are always kind of beckoning me. There's no past and there's no future. All there is the present. Everything is present all the time, forever. That's it. That's what we mean by oneness of time. There is no past and future. And the present, nothing changes in the present. It's a fixed state of mind. And remember what I said before, time is a concept derived from our memory of the changes in consciousness. So if our consciousness is changing, for example, if we're thinking of different things, then that's a change in our consciousness. And we can remember, oh yes, before I thought this thing and now I'm thinking that thing. And so we have changes in consciousness, we can remember that, and we can infer some idea of time from it. But when there is no change in consciousness, there's no thinking, there's no movement, then there is just oneness. Time is eternal. It always was, always will be. And that's a profound experience. It's a transformational experience. Not quite in the way that the Vedic sages thought. They thought that it was touching a metaphysical reality which was eternal. The Buddha would say, no, you're not seeing a metaphysical reality because that experience is still actually impermanent. Like you still sit down to meditate at a certain time and you get up from your meditation at a certain time. That experience actually is impermanent. But inside, it feels eternal. So what you're seeing is how your mind is constructing reality. And this is why these states of meditation are so important and so challenging. Because we realize that we can go into a state such as this and we can realize an entirely other world. A world of radiant, frozen bliss and light that lasts forever. And that world is not this world. And yet it's made of the same stuff that this world is. We got to that world by just doing our meditation and developing these psychological states and these qualities and these properties. And as we develop them, they transformed, and we realize that each of these things that we are developing is subtle and profound beyond measure that we had no idea was even possible. And we realize the potential of this transformation, and there's this other world. And you realize when you come out of that meditation, you come back to this world. And you realize how deeply this world sucks. In so many ways. Like, it's beautiful, don't get me wrong. I love this world. It's terrible. I love it. Right? And all of those stresses and changes and all of that blaring and that impact and that, all that stuff, that's all just there for one reason, because we want it. Because we want it. Sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, they don't exist because somehow they objectively exist. They exist because we cooked them. We said, I want to see things. Okay. We learned how to see things. Our world is a world constructed from our desires in order to satisfy our desires so we can get what we want. And we think that's going to make us happy. And when we come to a state where we let go, we experience stillness, then we start to understand what true happiness is. So this stage of meditation I've been talking about, the stage of the first jhana, is one of the first really profound and life-changing experiences in the path that a meditator has. There is much to talk about in terms of what lies beyond that and the states that will evolve and develop. I will leave those for now. I'd like to go back and talk just a little bit about the transition between this world and the other world, if you like. In Metta meditation, this is done in a particular way, which is a little bit different than in some other meditations. So I'm just going to talk about this because just to sort of make sure that you understand that framework. And if you're thinking, this doesn't apply to me, well, it won't, as long as you keep telling yourself that. Yeah. It applies to everybody who has 5 aggregates, which I think is all of us. We're all capable of developing it, and we're all capable of profound things. Okay. So we develop metta. Let's say we develop metta to the 4th stage. Metta for the hated person. All of the hindrances are quiet, virtually gone. And the mind focuses relentlessly on the metta for the disliked person, going into the center of that feeling, leaping forward with an energy and a purpose, not because you make it, but because your mind knows that it is near home. And it goes further and on. And as one does that, then the bliss and the radiance and the stability of that metta will grow and grow and grow. Now, at this point in meditation, we're not talking about Samadhi, we're not talking about jhanas yet, we're just talking about a preliminary still development of meditation and a preliminary nimitta of meditation. So I'm just going to say a couple of words about the idea of a nimitta in Buddhism. So the word nimitta means sign, and a nimitta in meditation is a sign. That's it. Actually, it's a very, very simple idea. The sign is not a thing. A sign is an indication. That's it. Just like if you go on a road and I'm looking for Frederick Street and there's a sign on there that says Frederick Street, then that sign indicates that thing. That's it. That's all a nimitta is. So your mind, the nimitta is your mind describing itself to itself. It's how your mind gives itself its messages. It tells you what's happening. So when your mind is becoming bright and filled with metta, it manifests as a nimitta or a sign. And in the metta meditation, that sign is primarily the feeling of metta. Okay? But that feeling of metta also has a dimension of radiance and light. Actually, these are just the same things. It doesn't really matter. It's just perception. So the nimittas are a mode of perception, which means that they don't have any intrinsic essence to themselves, but we can change them and see them. We can look at this and see it as a mug, or we can change our perception and see it as a picture of a dragon. It's both things and neither thing. These are just modes of perception. In breath meditation, the nimitta usually manifests as a light, but it depends on the meditator. It can happen in a different way. Now, as we continue in the metta meditation, then eventually that nimitta will transform itself and become what we call the patibhaga nimitta, or counterpart sign. So this is a terminology from the Visuddhimagga. So I'm just using it because it's a convenient way of describing what happens. And just in case anybody's familiar with that terminology, then you'll be able to sort of place it within that system. But if you don't like that terminology, then just forget about it. It's not that important. But the main thing is that at that point, the hindrances are gone and the mind becomes very stable and very bright and very powerful. Now, don't mistake me. By powerful, it doesn't mean gross. Actually, it's incredibly subtle. It's so subtle that it's almost not there. On the one hand, your mind is brighter and more powerful than it's ever been. So much so, it's not just that you look at, okay, it's not just like, is that particular hindrance, is that there or not? So when we talk about the absence of the hindrances, that's not what we mean. Like you can just be sitting there now, you don't have any ill will, Okay, the hindrance is absent, that's great. But that's not what we mean right now. What we mean is that these hindrances are completely banished, like shadows in the midday sun. There's just like no possibility of them coming. Like the idea of hindrances coming is kind of laughable at this point. And your mind feels so strong and so capable, like nothing it's ever felt before. But at the same time, it feels like you've come home. It feels like so natural. In fact, it feels almost inevitable. It feels like for the first time, you've seen that Nashi pear tree grow in its real shape. And you know, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. And you wonder why? Why? Why do we go through our lives torturing ourselves? Why do we go through our lives torturing our minds, messing with everything so much, when our minds can be just as naturally beautiful? So the mind, the Buddha said, mind doesn't have any intrinsic nature. It's not like the mind is one thing or another thing. Its only nature is to know. And if the mind is corrupted, then the knowing is corrupted. And when the mind is free of corruptions, the knowing is brilliant. So, this brilliance of the mind, like the shining of the moon emerging from the clouds or the light of the midday sun. Now, in breath meditation, if you reach this point, then you just let go and just stay with the nimitta. That's it. In metta meditation, you have just a little bit more to do, just a little bit. So what you do at this point is that from metta for your disliked person, then you say, may all beings in this room be happy. And you start spreading the metta out from your body for the first time. May all beings in the neighborhood be happy. May all beings in the region be happy. May all beings on earth be happy. Yeah. Just slowly spreading it out. May all beings be happy. May all beings be happy. No limits. May all beings be happy. Then you let go completely, let go of the word. At that time, the words are very residual anyway, very just a slight hint. Now you let go completely and just let the mind go. And so that is a kind of a freaky feeling because you have kept your consciousness inside your body for so long. And it's become so powerful. When you expand your mind to cover the whole world, you begin to realize what the Buddha was talking about when he was talking about doing this. It's not just an idea, but it's an experience of your consciousness literally expanded to cover the whole world. And then at a certain point, within that experience, at a certain point, something stops. Like something switches off. That, like there's been a fridge humming in the back of your mind since the day you were born. And suddenly someone turns it off. And you had no idea that that sound was ever there. And all you know is that something ceases and then your mind goes into jhana. Something ceases. You can't control it, you can't make it happen. It happens when conditions are ready. And that experience, that moving from one state to another, again, the manner in which that transition happens depends on perception. For some people, it's like stepping forward into another world. Some people, it's like falling down a well. It's quite common that at this kind of stage, at least initially, that you might feel afraid. And because everything in your mind is so powerful and so amplified, then your fear becomes amplified as well. Almost like a shock, and then you're obviously going to get pulled out of meditation. Start again. Why are you afraid? After all you're losing is everything that you've ever known and ever imagined. What's to be afraid of? So because it's such a radical transformation, then that fear can come. So do it a couple of times. Just remind yourself, it's just natural. It's just a natural state of mind. And then as you practice it a few times, then that fear will go away. So the practice of Samadhi is the culmination of all of the factors of the Eightfold Path: right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, all coming together in right Samadhi. Now, when a meditator first experiences a state like that, it just happens. And they don't necessarily understand it. They're not necessarily sure, is this real or is this not real, or what's happening or what's not happening. And so when they come out of the experience, of course, they'll know that something profound has happened. They won't necessarily know exactly what has happened. Okay? And at this point, this is where all of those good habits that we have been learning from the start of meditation start to bear fruit, because we have the good habit of learning how to go into a meditation, how to maintain it, and how to emerge from it. And we're now realizing, this is what we're doing. We're emerging from the meditation, and then we're reviewing, reflecting back on the meditation. And now that reviewing takes on a new depth, because we can see with the mind that's been empowered by that practice of Samadhi. And we can see the profundity of the transformation of the mind that Samadhi has brought about. And so when we review, we see, what happens when all the five sense consciousness ceases? What happens when consciousness is transformed? And we can reflect back on that experience and learn from it. This is where we develop our insight. So an advanced meditator, or someone who's practiced at doing jhanas, will be able to enter them whenever they like, be able to maintain them for as long as they like, and be able to leave them whenever they like. Actually, for a practitioner, developing these skills is kind of a normal part of what practice. Like we have inside ourselves like an inner clock. So you can, an advanced meditator can say, I've got an hour till lunch, I'm going to go and sit, I'm going to jhana until lunchtime, and then I'm going to come out. And then that's what they do. So these are the skills that we learn through regular practice, through habit. But again, this is why from the beginning we learn how to enter the meditation, how to maintain the meditation, how to leave the meditation, how to reflect on the meditation. These are basic skills of meditation. So I might leave it there for now and just see if anybody has any questions. That didn't take long.
Yes. The falling apart thing that you mentioned.
Which falling part? I think that's the falling part of the state of meditation.
Yeah.
Again, yeah.
So is that a one-time event, or do you revisit that repeatedly?
What you mean when you feel fear and then everything falls apart? Is that what we're talking about?
No, the other thing that you were mentioning. Maybe I misheard you.
No, maybe not.
There comes a point where things fall apart, you said. It's hard to describe. and then I can't remember what words you used to describe it.
Comes a time when things fall apart. It sounds like just life in general.
Then you have to just remind yourself it's natural.
Right.
This moment,
You mean like the going into jhana or going into samadhi point? No?
I
No, that's
think you
not
were
what
talking about,
Was it the two bodies?
the what?
The two bodies.
No. I'll pause on that and see if I can find the vocabulary, and then
Thank you.
maybe somebody else has a question.
And cheers. Krista.
So when you're doing metta meditation, after you've been through,
I saw you taking notes then.
yes, furiously. So there is a point when there is only after the fourth person, the disliked person, then there is only the feeling of metta, and it takes all the space.
Yeah, it's like you
And
get
then-
absorbed into the center of that feeling.
And then all the hindrances are gone.
Yeah.
And then what you do is, so after a while, you let the metta flow to the rooms, and then in larger and larger
Yeah.
circles
Yeah.
until everybody, all beings are included. So at that point, you also have to tell yourself, may all beings in the rooms be happy.
That's right. Yeah.
But can your mind still think that?
Yes.
Or your mind can still tell yourself?
That's right. Yeah.
So-
Because you're not in jhanas yet. You're just,
Okay, but all you can't hear. Let's say someone
you
makes
can
a
still
noise,
hear. Yeah.
or you can still hear,
Yeah.
but
Because you're not in jhanas
oh yeah,
yet.
it's in Janice.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So like at that point, so the commentarial term for that phrase is, for that state of meditation, is called upachara samadhi, which means threshold samadhi. So basically on the threshold of jhanas. But so because your mind's not fully absorbed yet, you can kind of think, but you kind of wouldn't. And you can kind of hear, but you kind of normally wouldn't. But if somebody's, said something or whatever, then it could still snap you out of the meditation. It's actually a very delicate phase, because at that point, even just like a subtle sound or something like that can actually pull you out. So that's the kind of that's why it's that kind of threshold thing. It's not quite one thing or the other just yet. Yeah. Okay.
I'm a little bit reluctant to talk about this, but I'm going to try.
Okay.
Last year, I was practicing metta for a week,
Okay.
and at the end of that week, I got to practicing metta for all beings. Well, I was finding myself.
Take your time. Take your time.
And it was an amazing experience. It was like I like to do all my meditations walking, or I prefer to do that. So I was walking
Okay.
really slowly in the woods,
Okay.
and I felt I was the sun. I was radiating across the entire universe. And there were no
Amazing.
words anymore.
Yeah.
I was burning metta all over into the universe.
Amazing.
I still get emotional.
Yeah.
But is that what you were talking about?
So yes, that sounds like it.
Yeah, well,
And that's like one of the signs, right? That when you're thinking about it now, even such a long time, Ajahn Brahm said that talked about the idea that like this kind of thing can be like, it's almost like an inverse trauma, like a positive trauma. It leaves such a powerful imprint on your mind that even like years later, you remember it very vividly, and obviously it has that effect on you.
It's good to have some kind of perspective on it.
Yeah. So like with any kind of state of meditation and anything that you're practicing, it's always like the relationship between the experience and you know, a doctrine and a text and so on are always kind of difficult to pin down. So it's going around and saying, is this is not really that useful. But I think it is useful to sort of understand how the way that the Buddha talked about meditation leads us from this to there. And that's really the main thing, yeah. And if we have those kinds of beautiful experiences, it's not, unfortunately, not unusual that it will happen as a one-off or occasion. And often we don't really know exactly what's going on until we can do it repeatedly. And then we can really kind of start to reflect on it and get to know it more intimately, because it's a very overwhelming thing, right? Yeah. And you can imagine like having that kind of experience. You can imagine that if you were a Hindu or a Christian or something, that you'd probably be like, oh yeah, I saw God or something like that. I mean, that's what it feels like. It feels like you've encountered this incredible transcendent divinity. And of course, according to Buddhism, you actually did become God, because that's how Brahma gods get to be Brahma gods, is by practicing this meditation. So congratulations, you became God. That's nice. I love that for you.
Not still
That's
on
terrific.
diet.
Yeah. Suzanne. Yeah. 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 Right.
And does it make sense that there can be bacteria there at time and that your health, your breath is not health?
Yeah. Look, so the question was about whether when you're crossing that threshold, whether you feel fear and you have fear of dying. Yeah, look, it's obviously it's extremely primal, you know. So one of the in Buddhism you have like the three kinds of cravings, you know, the craving to experience sensual pleasures, the craving to be, craving to not be. Right? And so you sort of letting go of the craving for sense experience. But there's also kind of the craving for being is also being challenged there, right? Because everything that you've ever been is now ending and you're entering a kind of a new state of being. So it hits you at this really primal level. One thing that you can do as a preparation for that is you can, at the beginning, if that happens, then at the beginning of your next meditation, before you start the meditation, or when you start the meditation, you do the mindful awareness, just as we have done. But before you start doing the metta, you do a practice of not self for maybe 10 minutes or so. And so you just do a reflection, go through all of your sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch, all through your senses especially, and just reflect on all of these are not self. And they're not under your control.